Joining us now for his very first television interview since assuming the job of White House Communications Director is Ben LeBold. Ben, thank you for being here. What a day, what a time to start the new gig. Let me just get right to, I think, the question that a lot of folks are wondering. Is the White House now negotiating over the debt limit?
No. Look, Alex, default is not an option. It would tip the country into a recession and cost us millions of jobs. The president simply won't allow that to happen. What the president has been open to throughout this process is a budget negotiation, is an appropriations negotiation through the typical process. And so he's deployed his team to Capitol Hill to negotiate and find a reasonable bipartisan agreement that both parties in both chambers can support. That's the way out of this. That's the way out of this crisis. We're not going to give up the economic gains of the past 2 years. 12.7 million jobs created, 800,000 manufacturing jobs, a clean energy industry getting off the ground in this country. The president and his negotiators are going to protect those gains throughout this process.
I'm still confused about how that is not a negotiation over the debt limit, even if it is being called a negotiation over the budget. It is happening at precisely the same time that Republicans are holding hostage the American economy, and that seems to be their trump card, pardon the invocation of Trump's name. In that respect, I guess I wonder, are you concerned that Republicans are ready to shoot the hostage and that they fundamentally, because of that, hold the upper hand?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, look, we did think it was an encouraging meeting between the leaders today. It's important that Leader McConnell said after the first meeting that default was not an option. Speaker McCarthy came close to that at the microphones today. And so the leaders seem to be heading in the same direction, that default is not an option. It would cost the American economy and American workers too much. There's some distance between the budget agreements. There's no question about that. The president has introduced a budget to continue to invest in America and support manufacturing and clean energy and bringing down health care costs. And Republicans, as you pointed out in your opening segment, have introduced a budget that would cut by 22% essential programs for working Americans, from health care to veterans' health care benefits to law enforcement to the Border Patrol. And so there's significant distance still between the budgets. But what we're looking for at this stage, we've got to get default taken off the table. And then, look, the president recognizes it's a Republican House. There's going to have to be some compromise to get to a budget agreement, and we recognize that. But he's bringing a budget plan to the process that does reduce the deficit by $3 trillion, but does it by taxing the wealthiest and taxing corporations. And demanding we put an end to subsidies for oil and gas companies and big pharma. So that's the framework the president and his negotiators are taking into the process. But ultimately, we're going to need to get to a reasonable bipartisan deal that can pass both chambers.
And is there a timetable for that? I guess I'm trying to understand. The budget negotiation process seems like you guys are far apart on that, and you readily admit as such. The priorities are radically different. Do you think that you're going to reach agreement on those budgetary principles in the same window that you need to get everybody on the same page about default on the debt, in terms of the debt ceiling?
Well, look, we have a very important deadline for default, right? Secretary Yellen has analyzed the tax returns and determined that as soon as June 1st, the government could fail to pay its obligations. When we even got close to that deadline in 2011, we got downgraded, and that had economic implications. And so we can't allow that to happen to the American people. We need to take default off the table at the same time as we can get, as the president's always been willing to, a framework for a budget through the typical process off the ground. Sure, that will take some time to negotiate. There is a significant gap between priorities there, but we're going to take our priorities to that framework. His negotiators are on the Hill. And ultimately, the outcome we need over the next couple of weeks is to remove default from the table and ensure that we don't tip into a recession.
I'm sorry to belabor this point, Ben, but you're talking about a few weeks. We know, practically speaking, there are 5 or 6 working days for Congress to actually get something done on this. Are you on the same page about, I know the White House is has been firm in its stance that the U.S. economy cannot default. Is Kevin McCarthy signaling that he too believes the U.S. economy cannot default? And if not, how do you get him to do that in the next 5 or 6 working days?
We think this was a productive meeting today that headed towards a recognition between the leaders that default is simply not an option. And now negotiations on the Hill around a budget framework have been accelerated. The president introduced his budget on March 9th, I'd remember you. So we brought that to the table. The Republicans passed theirs in late April. And so we have had a window to get this budget negotiation off the ground. The negotiators the president sent to the Hill, Louisa Terrell, Steve Ricchetti, and Shalanda Young, they started those conversations this evening. They're happening in earnest. I think there's more working days in a week than typical right now because we need to get this done because of the catastrophic implications default could have for the economy.
Do you have the sense, does the president believe that Kevin McCarthy is a reliable narrator in terms of getting things past his caucus and making agreements that will actually stick?
Well, look, I think he believes that the speaker is a trustworthy person. He also recognizes the politics of the conference right now and that it took 15 votes to get elected speaker and that the budget framework that's been introduced by House Republicans reflects the framework of the right-wing Freedom Caucus. We think the path forward is really finding a budget framework that can pass both chambers, that members of both parties are going to need to vote for, and we need a majority of those votes. And so we're going to have to look in both parties to find the votes for the path forward.
And you think Kevin McCarthy is acting in good faith as all of that is concerned. But I do wonder, is the president willing to keep any other mechanisms, like, for example, the 14th Amendment in his back pocket as a fail-safe in case these negotiations don't work out?
You know, the president has addressed that. One of the challenges with taking unilateral executive action right now is that it's likely to end up in litigation and could be decided through the courts in fairly short order. You know, our goal here is to take default off the table for the longer term, not to present a solution that could just buy us a week or two.
I guess I got to ask you, I want to turn. I know it's a hard turn, but I have to ask you because it seems like we are dealing with an increasingly alarming situation as it concerns attacks on government officials. Gerry Connolly, the congressman, his office was there's been a wave of attacks against various government officials, whether it's Jake Sullivan, Gerry Connolly, Paul Pelosi, not actually a government official, but of course the husband of the former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. We do not know what the motives are for all of these attacks, but we do know that emanating from right-wing circles, there is a lot of anti-government rhetoric, a lot of violent rhetoric. Is the White House concerned about what may come in the next months as potentially increasing pressure is ratcheted up on former President Trump? I mean, to what degree does the White House look at this landscape and say we are headed and careening towards potential disaster?
Well, listen, you know, political violence and violence in the political process is one of the reasons that President Biden decided to run in 2020. He saw the events in Charlottesville, and he grew concerned that what in the past had been rhetorical debate, suddenly you're seeing the rise of hate and hate crimes and political violence, which isn't acceptable in any scenario. So, you know, the Justice Department plays a role in responding to that. Federal and state and local law enforcement certainly play a role in responding to that, and the president has made it a priority to resource them. But it is an ongoing concern and something that the administration is doing everything we can to make sure that the American people stay, you know, never resort to political violence. The president has consistently condemned this, and ultimately it's up to the Justice Department to make sure we're holding accountable those who perpetuate these sorts of crimes.
White House Communications Director Ben LaBolt. It's great talking with you, Ben. Thanks for your time tonight.
Nice to talk to you, Alex.
you.